Hello, I'm Alexis Safkin, CEO at BSC Designer, the platform for strategy execution. And in this video, we're going to talk about policies and controls and their implementation in strategic planning. And to illustrate the idea of how a control and policy is implemented in strategic planning, we will use the comparison between weak implementation and strong implementation. So here we have an example, ethical and quality control in sales. And let's see how it's implemented in a case of weak control. Yeah? So the policy is formulated like this. We expect our sales team to always act ethically and professionally with customers. So this is a kind of wishful formulation of a policy. It's quite vague defined, and yeah, that's something we typically see in many policy documents. That such policies are not really um, prepared for implementation and execution. How this policy is supposed to be controlled? In this case, we have another WAC statement. Managers are responsible for ensuring ethical behavior. So we know who is responsible, but we don't know how uh, this will be controlled, how those managers will actually make sure that the behavior of sales team is ethical and follows certain quality standards. And once we find some deviation, what happens? What management actions are applied? Again, in this case, no specific actions were suggested. Issues will be handled when they arise. So, okay, we'll decide what we do once we see the problem. Now, let's try to make this control stronger. First of all, we'll replace the WAG definition of policy with something more specific. In this case, we can say sales interaction must comply with defined ethical and quality standards. Okay, it's one step ahead towards something more specific. So we're not referring to a general idea of ethical behavior or quality standards in sales. We're referring to some standards. Okay, those standards, again, they need to be defined. There should be some document with some properties, some qualities that we can use to check sales process against, but at least that's a good step forward. Uh, what happens with controls? Here we can be more specific. So instead of just saying some things like managers are responsible for making sure this policy works, we suggest a specific control, which is random sampling of sales called transcript reviewed against approved criteria. So we suggest the source of data, which will be the transcripts of the calls. We suggest a method to pick those uh, call scripts for review. So it will be random sampling, and we also imply that there are certain quality criteria that we'll use. So this control is much stronger than the previous version. And in terms of management action, okay, we suggest like three actions depending on the planning horizon. Yeah. So when we detect certain problem, the first thing that we'll do root cause analysis of this problem. Then we'll try to solve it by coaching to the sales team and to make sure that we are learning from our mistakes long term, we will plan continuous policy and process review refinement. Okay, so that's how the initial policy and control were improved, and now the picture is much clearer. Yeah. But there is one thing that is still missing because right now the controls can be interpreted in different ways. We have no clarity about what kind of things we're actually counting. And to introduce this clarity into this policy and control, we need to define certain methods for quantification. And we don't want just to put numbers. We also want to have evidence that support those numbers. Yeah. So here is an example of the metrics that we can use. And we have two types of metrics. One leading metric for efficiency is the percentage of calls reviewed. So basically, more calls we review, we expect the uh, overall control to be performing better. But efficiency is not effectiveness. So we need to make sure that this control is actually capturing the required violations. And that's what we do with the percentage of calls with violations. The first effectiveness metric, the basic one. But um, capturing a lot of violations, it doesn't mean that we capture actually something that important is important in this context. And for this reason, we have the second login indicator, which is percentage of high risk cases. And once again, we'll look a little bit further in the future and we ask a question. Yeah, so we detected certain violations, we detected certain high risk cases, but if we are learning from those findings, so another logging indicator, still it's about effectiveness, but it's uh, kind of longer term effectiveness, the impact. So with these four indicators, we're equipped and we made the control more tangible. But that's what we typically see for policies and controls within strategic documents. Another question is how to put it in practice, how to make sure that it's actually implemented within a business system of organization. So here are the steps that we need to do to implement it in practice. We need to define uh, policies, controls, and the management actions like we did before. Typically, it can happen in text documents. Then we need to start using this control. So we define the metrics to make sure the control is working. And it's not just one-time exercise. We need to track those metrics continuously to make sure that we know that control is working properly long time enough. Then for the cases of internal or external audits, we need to keep evidence for those numbers that we upload to the metrics. So we cannot just enter the random number and say, okay, we captured like 20% of high risk cases. No, we need to upload certain evidences, which will be probably in this case the logs from the calls, the transcripts of the call, or the reports that compare the problems found within the call with the quality standards defined in other documents. So evidence. Then we typically would like to report this to the stakeholders in our organization, to our managers, to HR to make sure that training is updated, to senior management, probably to auditor as well. Yeah. So that's what's related to the implementation of control and C, but it also is used is placed in a certain strategic environment. Yeah. In this sense, we need to define two things. We need to understand what are the parts of our strategy implementation contribute to this control and where this control is contributing to. for example, if the metric that we had before, the percentage of returning violations is high, where should it contribute to? It should contribute to a scorecard, for example, for talent management, to make sure that certain training course is conducted, certain coaching, to make sure that our sales team is trained in a different way, yeah, or hiring policy is changed. And the same for the input for the policy and control. So two big steps: one, defining control itself, and then putting it into a strategic environment, connecting to other parts of strategy. uh, yeah, and thinking about the use of controls on scale, like the cases that we started with, the uh, case when a consultancy uses a control, or our organization uses some control internally. One of the challenge is to scale the user control, to reuse similar or the same controls for other aspects. Like if we define this control for one sales team, probably we want to have it for all sales team, for all sales offices. Yeah, so that's another challenge that we face when we implement it in practice. So, final thoughts about how you do it if you use BC Designer platform. How you use it if your main strategy is defined in BC Designer. You have there your scorecards, and you want to have there your controls. What we do. Uh, Here is an example, and as you can see, that's the control that we have discussed. And the first thing that the implementation in the platform allows me to do is to actually describe the structure of this policy and control. So I see I have sales interaction must comply with defined ethical quality standard. That's our policy. Under this policy, I see random sampling as our control. Under this, I see management actions, an initiative where inside we have described what we do, the cause and effect analysis, uh, the root cause analysis, the redefinition of the policies, all these action steps. And finally, we have a number of metrics. So the percentage of calls reviewed is a leading metric. I recognize it by the green rectangle next to it. And we also have three lagging metrics. Then, what the platform helps us with is to track the performance of each metric that belongs to the control. And in some cases, like for example, percentage of calls reviewed, the metric is configured as a maximization function. So with increase of percentage of calls reviewed, the performance, the progress of this metric will be increasing. And some metrics like percentage of high risk cases, obviously we want to minimize the number of such cases. So it's configured for minimization. With a decrease of the value, the performance of this metric will increase. And this is configured on the performance tab in the platform. I also can see that these three login metrics in the end, they have different weights configured. And this way we are changing the way the platform calculates the total performance. So now if I would select this item and go to performance tab, I would see there that its performance, the performance of random sampling, is calculated as weighted average of its child items. So weighted average of these three login indicators. And I see in the weight column that the lowest weight of 20% is percentage of calls with violations, and 40% is for percentage of high risk cases. In this way, we ensure that it's not easy to game this control. Yeah, I'm not able to find just smaller, less significant violations and make sure that we complied with the target of finding enough violations. No, I would need to find high risk cases, and those cases would actually impact the performance of the control. Okay, so this logic is actually what is defined according to the business context, according to what kind of behavior we have in mind. Now, it's not seen here, but if you go to the data tab next to the value for these metrics, you could upload some evidence. And it can be as simple as uploading a file, or it can be like defining evidence framework required for this specific metric, so that the platform controls and makes sure that for each update you upload required evidence. Yeah? So for example, if you report about the percentage of high risk cases, the platform can ask you to upload some supporting documents, some transcripts of the calls where these parts are specifically referenced. Um, Again, not seen on the screenshot, but we can align this control and its performance metrics with other parts of the strategy. So for example, I can copy this percentage recurrence after corrective actions. I can copy it. I can go to, for example, HR scorecard. I can paste it there, and I can select what kind of connection I want. Probably I want connection by data, so that in my HR scorecard, I see how well we're learning from the errors that we have found. And if we're not learning, probably it's time to revise our training program, or probably it's time to revise our hiring program. Yeah, so we have some insights for action. Um, the last case that we discussed before, it's what we do with this control. We want to reuse it. Yeah. Again, in the platform, it's simple and simply you can just select it and copy like we do with the text. What you also can do within the platform is copy and select the option which is called paste and keep sync. In this case, the initial control will work as a template, and you can create replicas of this control. The benefit of this approach is that if you modify initial template, those changes will be translated to all its replicas. So in this case, you can maintain controls within different scorecards. And if you need to change the structure, you change it in just one place. You don't need to open all scorecards and introduce updates manually there. And finally, of course, reporting. Yeah, so by just logging into the platform, we also already can see some data, some dynamics, some progress. We can change the view, and we can also generate different reports depending on what we want to see for the performance of this control. That's all that I wanted to share with you about the use of policies and controls. We discussed some weak control example, and we discussed a strong control example. We discussed what it's required for the implementation of this control. And of course, we talked about how the controls can be implemented in the BSC Designer platform. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact our team to discuss the details in your specific case. Thank you.